If you had told me a few months ago that we would get a Star Trek Voyager crossover game in 2025, I would have told you that you were crazy. And with good reason. Not only has it been some 24 years since the series finale aired in May 2001, but it's been 22 years since the last crossover game, Elite Force 2, a game which is undoubtedly one of, if not the, best first-person shooter set in a Star Trek universe. Alas, thanks to developer Game Excite, there is another crossover game on its way, known as Voyager Across the Unknown, releasing sometime in the near future. Welcome, my name's Azadash and welcome to my first look at Across the Unknown. I'm going to be examining the gameplay, testing the storytelling, looking at what works and what doesn't work to answer the question, is it actually any good? Now, I'll be honest, when I saw the game was being developed by Game Excite, I was curious, as it was a developer I had never heard of. After checking out their website, I noticed that they had only worked on 3 other games, all based on the Asterix series, making Across the Unknown not just their first Star Trek game, but their first video game outside of the Asterix series. There's been no shortage of questionable Star Trek games, and I should know, I've reviewed most of them. However, there have been some great games, especially from new developers, such as Star Trek Resurgence, which gives hope to the idea that Game Excite could still make a good Star Trek game, even if it was their first. It kind of goes without saying that this is a pre-release demo. It is not really fair to use it as a definitive benchmark for the final game. However, broadly speaking, I don't think we are going to see any enormous changes to the underlying systems and mechanics, which is where a lot of my critique will be focused on. The decision to revisit the Voyager universe is a particularly interesting one, and one probably best described as high risk and high reward. I am really conflicted about how I feel about the setting because, on one hand, the Voyager story has been told before, and it already has a definitive conclusion found in the television series. On the other hand, there is a lot of very memorable stories to be found in the Voyager universe, and thanks to the choices the game presents, the player can effectively craft their own version of the Voyager story. The demo features the first chapter of the game, which roughly translates to the Voyager pilot episode, Caretaker, and even in the span of the relatively short demo, I was able to make pretty significant changes as to how that episode played out, to the extent that instead of destroying the array and stranding Voyager in the Delta Quadrant, I was able to use the array to send Voyager back home instead. Now, I thought that would be the end of the demo, but when Voyager arrived back, I then had further decisions to make, such as what to do with the Marquis, who I decided to arrest and detain, a far cry from the original episode's plot. I guess my only question is, what is the ultimate benefit of using the Voyager universe and brand, as opposed to lifting all of the systems and mechanics into a new ship and crew, which would have probably afforded a little more narrative freedom? And interestingly, this concern is really amplified by what is, to be fair to the developers, a well-documented limitation of the demo, that being no voice acting. I actually went into my settings at first and checked that I hadn't accidentally muted them, as even as early as the first few cutscenes, the absence of voice acting really hurts the emotional impact of the storytelling. There's a significant reveal in the game early on, which viewers of the series will remember. However, how it unfolds in the game, with a lack of any spoken dialogue, just completely undermines how significant it should feel. The developers have said that they are exploring options for voiceovers, and while I'm not expecting 10,000 lines of spoken dialogue, I would hope that the cutscenes will definitely be included. In terms of if you need to have watched the series to enjoy the game, I would probably say that your experience would be enhanced if you've watched at least some of the series. However, thanks to some good storytelling in the game, through both cutscenes and text exposition, all of the main story beats are well telegraphed to the player, ensuring you still get a good experience regardless of your viewing history. I'm really excited to see how the story progresses in the main game, as well as the narrative freedom given to some of the series' more impactful moments. Even what is on offer in the demo is impressive from a choice perspective, and you can really tell that the developers know their Trek. There's even a line inserted around Harry never getting promoted, which is a great little touch of fan service. Before we continue, a massive thank you to those who support the channel. If you enjoy this type of content, please consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel. With that out of the way, let's power up the warp core, set a course for the nearest planet, and dive in to explore Star Trek Voyager Across the Unknown. At the risk of making the game seem a lot more complicated than it actually is, Across the Unknown is a story-driven survival strategy game with roguelike elements. In my experience, games that lean into these mixed genres are often complex with very steep learning curves, often taking quite a bit of time before the player is able to work out how each of the genre's systems and mechanics interact with one another. However, this is certainly not the case here, with the game doing a really good job of blending the genres together in a way that feels simple, cohesive, and intuitive. The game's resource management system is a great testament to this execution. While there are several different resources the game uses, they are broadly divided into two categories: energy, such as deuterium, which can also be converted to food, and materials, such as geranium, which is used in construction. You begin the game in what's referred to as grey mode, essentially a low-power mode of the ship, which only allows for bare necessities such as engines to be used, with no power available for things like replicators for better food or life support for crew quarters. This means that as well as not being able to use the majority of Voyager's systems, crew morale will also begin to drop, given the crew will be sleeping in corridors and eating meal rations. To solve this, you need to collect a resource called deuterium, one of the energy resources, to power the warp core to bring the ship back to full power, which you can still do by visiting various planets and locations and making decisions which allow for collection of the resource. Once you have collected enough, you can enter the power systems menu and turn the warp core back on, as well as reactivate key systems such as replicators for better food. You always have a very clear indication of just how many turns, or cycles as the game puts it, of main power is remaining, allowing you to plan your next actions with some foresight. The impressive thing here is that while resource management touches many parts of the experience, they all feel really well connected to one another. There's simplicity in the essentials, but enough complexity in the rarer resources to provide a challenge. While the game is quite literally powered by the resource mechanic, this only really serves as a framework to the game's many other systems, which I would consider exploration, management, and combat. From an exploration perspective, the game offers the ability to travel both within star systems and between different star systems, known as sectors. Exploring each star system gives the player the ability to replenish resources from various sources, as well as encounter other ships and species, some with more peaceful intentions than others. When you do encounter a planet or a ship, the game will often present a list of choices based on the situation while factoring in Voyager's current status. Take for example when encountering a debris field, you have two choices available: a safer option, collecting easy to recover debris, or a riskier option in using the tractor beam. The safer option will net less total resources, but has a 100% chance of succeeding, whereas the tractor beam option will potentially net more resources, but have a chance of failure, resulting in less resources than the safer option. Success or failure is determined by what is effectively a dice roll, represented as a marker sliding between a scale of green being good and yellow being bad, or sometimes even red being very bad. Through other choices you make, you can increase your chances of success, or even unlock new options which might present even more favourable outcomes. Occasionally, you'll have the opportunity to visit a planet, and this allows you to select various crew members and beam them down, with a similar choice system being presented, with the added layering of specific crew traits, such as being good at survival or being a specific race, increasing the chances of success. When you are not exploring or progressing the game's main story, you'll be managing the ship's various decks and systems, as well as a fairly elaborate research system which unlocks new technologies. The game uses individual deck life support systems as its progression gate to unlock new areas of the ship, and this is really both a great in-universe explanation for gating progression, as well as something which presents a uniquely layered challenge, given the player will require much rarer resources to repair these systems and unlock more real estate to further develop Voyager. There are main areas of the ship that you would expect to be accessible, such as engineering and the shuttle bay. However, to construct new areas, such as additional crew quarters or special rooms which can be unlocked using research, you will need to first clear debris and then build the rooms using engineering resources, all gated behind the requirement for the deck to have a functioning life support system. You can also upgrade rooms using various rare resources, and this goes a long way to providing the player with a fair bit of agency as to just what type of Voyager they want to create for themselves. Combat is an interesting affair, and one that, while fairly simple, has just enough depth to feel satisfying. It's not turn-based and it's not real-time, it's more semi-real-time, with the player able to pause combat to issue orders, such as focusing attacks on a particular area of an enemy ship, or to protect a particular area of Voyager. There's also the ability to use various hero abilities from a list of pre-selected crew members selected before the engagement, with things like increased damage or increased defense available on a cooldown timer. There is only one real combat encounter in the demo, so it's difficult to really form much of an opinion on it, but if I had to describe it at this early stage, I'd say that it is serviceable, with more depth hopefully to come from the full release. Overall though, the gameplay is very good and strikes a really good balance of delivering enough depth where it's needed to be interesting, but providing enough simplicity in some of the more routine tasks so they don't get boring. In terms of critique for the gameplay, honestly, I don't have much. What's included in the demo is really good and genuinely excites me to get into the full game. Probably the only area of gameplay which I think could be improved is the combat. While I like the idea of the hero abilities, I didn't really feel like they changed anything in the combat encounter. In fact, playing through the battle and not using any of them resulted in exactly the same outcome. Like I said though, what's available here is literally only the first combat encounter of the game, so it's fair to assume that things will improve with the scope of the full game. I played the demo on a fairly high-end PC, however it is also releasing on PlayStation and Xbox. Unfortunately, there has not been a Switch 2 version announced, and I do find this really disappointing, as from my time with the game, it would certainly appeal to the pick-up-and-play audience, which is well served on Nintendo's console. I'd go as far to say that I would probably purchase a Switch 2 version before a PC version, given the fact I could easily play it on the go. In terms of the presentation, probably the best words to describe it would be very encouraging. Now, let me be clear, it's mostly excellent, with a few glaring gaps that I'm hopeful will be improved in the final release. Firstly, the good. The overall art design is very faithful to the television series and has been well crafted to provide a very authentic feeling with very little in the way of clutter. The ship graphics, both in external view and the sliced view, are also of a really high standard, with a particular standout being the lighting and animation. Combat is also good, with very high resolution textures on display to ensure the player's focus is on the ships as opposed to the vacuum of space. As for what doesn't work as well from a presentation perspective, there's a few menu systems, such as a tech tree, which are just needlessly difficult to navigate, with it giving me the idea that the developers tried to fit the UI into a specific design, as opposed to crafting the design to support the UI. Then there's the graphics used between the intermissions, and these vary wildly between things which look like concept art and things which look like a low-resolution capture of a TV episode. All in all though, Across the Unknown is a really good looking game, and one that very frequently showcases not only design concepts from the television series, but new design concepts based on the historic designs to help expand the scope of this almost choose-your-own-adventure game. In terms of audio, like I mentioned earlier, the developers have specifically called this out as an area which is underdeveloped in the game demo, and it is indeed very far from ideal. It kind of goes back to what I said about the decision to base the game on Voyager as opposed to another new ship. If you are going to use a legendary property, you really need to ensure that you are delivering as much of that authenticity, such as using the theme song as an example, to fully capitalize on that property. Before downloading the demo for Across the Unknown, I had very low expectations. I'm not saying it looked like a carbon copy, but it looked like it had things in common with Star Trek Infinite, a game that I couldn't even push through to produce a video on. However, my experience could not have been more different to my expectation. Across the Unknown has the chance to be one of the best Star Trek games released. Yes, it still needs work in some key areas. However, the developers have been very upfront in sharing that, to the extent that they actually have a Discord where you can submit feedback. The game doesn't have a final release date yet, but I would take a guess based on what has been shown that we might be looking at an early to mid 2026 calendar release, a date that I would be more than happy with if it allowed for some further refinement and polish. But that's enough from me. Do you agree or disagree with my opinions? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.